Monaco, a postcard-perfect country synonymous with super yachts, Formula One, and discreet wealth management, has suddenly become the setting for a real-world crime thriller. A parcel bomb that exploded at the entrance of a residential building near the French border has injured 3 people, including a Ukrainian-born tycoon with links to Russia, and the suspect has reportedly fled into France, turning a quiet Riviera into an international manhunt. So this edition of From the News Desk will be different. Today, we explore how from a microstate that prides itself on tight security and political neutrality, the blast felt like the Russia-Ukraine conflict might be spilling onto scenic streets that were never meant to become part of the battlefield. Well, the explosion ripped through the entrance of an apartment block on a street perched right on the Monaco-France frontier and normally trafficked by residents returning from restaurants rather than fleeing suspects. Monaco's prosecutor, Stephen Tilbolt, said a man was caught on surveillance footage leaving a bag or a parcel in the lobby before walking away. Moments later, the device detonated as a family stepped across the threshold, sending bolts and metal pallets tearing through the glass. In fact, authorities there describe it as a shrapnel bomb designed to maximize injuries, a level of violence Monaco's Minister of State, Christopher Mirmand, called unprecedented in the nation's modern history. 3 victims, a businessman, his wife, and their 13-year-old son, were seriously wounded and rushed to a nearby hospital, while additional residents were treated for cuts from flying glass. In fact, surveillance footage shows the suspect fleeing up a set of stairs towards a French town, crossing an effectively open border where there are no routine checks, forcing French and Monaco's police into a joint manhunt on the sides of a steep hillside. In fact, Monaco's Prince Albert II quickly condemned the attack as an odious act and vowed that all national services had been mobilized, underscoring how a single parcel bomb has shaken a state that prides itself on its image as one of Europe's safest jurisdictions. Now, French and Ukrainian media have identified the wounded businessman as Vadim Yarmolaev, a construction and real estate tycoon originally from Dnipro, Ukraine, who built his fortune through the Aleph Industrial and Trading Group. In fact, Forbes once estimated his wealth at around $220 million, placing him among Ukraine's richest individuals before he reallocated with his family to Monte Carlo. Now, interestingly, his profile complicates this entire case. He renounced his Ukrainian citizenship several years ago and obtained Cypriot nationality, presenting himself as a global investor rather than a national oligarch. Then comes December 2023, when Ukrainian President Zelensky signed a decree imposing a 10-year sanction package on him after Ukraine's National Security and Defense Council accused his businesses of continuing to operate under Russian law in Crimea and paying taxes into Russian coffers. In fact, investigations by Ukrainian and European outlets have detailed how parts of his alcohol and wine empire were re-registered according to Russian legislation after the annexation of Crimea. Allegations he has challenged in courts but thus far failed to overturn. Now that background, Ukrainian-born, now a Cypriot citizen living in Monaco, sanctioned by Kiev over alleged collaboration with Russian structures, makes him an emblem of tangled business networks which sits at the intersection of war, sanctions, and personal enrichment. Whether this attack was personally motivated, criminal, or geopolitical in nature remains under investigation, but the choice of targets inevitably invites speculation about enemies on both sides of the front line. Now, Russia has a long and a well-documented record of striking perceived opponents far beyond its border through poisoning, shooting operations that have drawn global condemnation. In fact, many US and European reports detail dozens of Kremlin-linked killings or attempts abroad in the post-2000 era, from the radioactive polonium used against Alexander living in London to nerve attack against Sergei Skripal in Salisbury and other suspected operations against dissidents and defectors across Europe. These acts form parts of a broader pattern of transnational repression in which Russian security services treat foreign cities as extension of their battlefield. Now let's talk about Ukraine. Well, by contrast, has largely concentrated its kinetic efforts on Ukrainian territory and regions such as Crimea, employing drones, missiles, and sabotage against military and logistical targets rather than oligarchs living in Western safe havens. Now, Kiev has intensified long-range strikes on bridges, depots, and air bases in Crimea and inside Russia to raise the cost of occupation and disrupt Moscow's war machine. But those operations still sit within the geographical frame of Russo-Ukrainian war rather than Monaco or any other part of the country. It is precisely this contrast that makes the Monaco attack so striking. Well, here is a Ukrainian-born businessman sanctioned by Kiev for alleged ties to Russia and business activities under Russian jurisdiction, blown up by a sophisticated parcel bomb on the doorstep of his home in a state that officially stands outside this very war between Russia and Ukraine. With the suspect disappearing into France, the investigation now spans at least 2 countries, raising questions about who ordered the attack and whether it forms part of a wider pattern of proxy scores settling between networks aligned with Moscow or Kiev. Well, for now, Monaco and France are treating this case as an attempted murder, not formally categorizing it as terrorism, and officials have cautioned against jumping to any conclusions without state involvement. Yet this very blast has already pierced the illusion that places like Monaco stands apart from Europe's brutal new age of shadow wars. Well, in this crime thriller on the Riviera, the characters' motives and methods look disturbingly familiar to anyone who has watched Russia and Ukraine collide over the last decade. And the next chapter may say as much about the future of this extraterritorial violence as they do about one tycoon's personal enemies. Well, with that, it's a wrap on today's edition of From the News Desk. Thank you so much for watching, and I'm Yash Goel signing off for Times Now Digital. Until next time, take care and keep watching this space for more such videos.